corded versus cordless tools. Now, if you're like most of us, we have cordless tools in just about every home that uses tools to any kind of regular occurrence. There probably are some old school homes out and about where people had corded tools. They don't use their tools that much, and that's all they have. That being said, cordless tools are the standard for most people these days. And probably, even in my case, two-thirds of the tools that I use are cordless. However, I do really think that there's still a place in the world for corded tools. Now, there's also air and pneumatic tools out there, and as a general rule, in like construction and woodworking, pneumatic tools are kind of like limited as a general rule. That doesn't mean that they don't have a place either, but that's a very specific thing. And even though there are some pneumatic tools that are comparative or are the same as corded, it's not the same thing. And we're not really going to talk about those because they really are a different set of tools. Now, the reality of it is that I do like some cordless tools, and I have drills and drivers and like impact drivers, and I don't really have just a screwdriver. I have a drill that works as a screwdriver. I know that they sell like the M12 by Milwaukee has that little nubby screwdriver thing, and then I think like DeWalt has one, and then Makita and all of them have theirs. And surprisingly enough, I just saw that like Bosch has not Bosch, Hart has a number of those as well, and a bunch of people really like those, and that's cool. There's tools out there for everybody, right? But at some point there's going to be a time where you might realize, wait, my tools that I'm using probably could be better if they were corded. And this is where knowing and understanding what you do for work or for hobby or whatever it is you're doing really comes into play. For me, particularly speaking, I find that I really like certain tools of mine because of what I do to be corded. So for instance, one of the things I really enjoy being corded is my circular saw. So I'm not going out and doing work on like contract work or whatever at houses or buildings. I don't have to be as portable, and I don't do like just framing wood and stuff like that, right? And there is a place for cordless circular saws in that world. And if you're doing certain kinds of woodwork, like I know a few guys here in town, they are building like log cabins, right? So they are using chainsaws and the big like 10 to 12 inch circular saws, and they're usually worm drive, and they are like back handle saws and all that kind of stuff. Corded is definitely the way to go, just because they're cutting through like big beams of wood, right? And that's really kind of what differentiates the need, in my opinion, for cordless versus corded, and where they benefit and shine and where they might not. Even still, cordless can be useful in those areas. However, keeping in mind that corded tools have a more consistent power, especially if you're out like in an area where you don't have much power and you have very limited power access. Trying to keep batteries charged all the time and things like that can be a challenge. So at times, even though it may sound weird, why would you be using a corded tool if you have limited power? It's easier to run a cable and use a corded tool that goes more quickly and gets the work done that you need done. You swap the plug out, use the next tool or whatever it might be, instead of having your outlet taken up by batteries. The other thing is that even though it's not as big of a thing these days, right? You still do have to be concerned about the generators you might have if you're running generators, and whether or not they will damage any of your battery chargers that you might have going. I'm sorry, I'm getting comments in, and most of them aren't even worth registering. So the reality of it is that you still do need to make sure that the generator you're using won't burn up your battery charger and your batteries. Even though, like I said, a lot of generators, even cheaper ones like from Harbor Freight and things like that, have gone a long way and become way more proficient. Um, and they aren't as much of a risk of burning up your batteries. But still, on a generator, you're only going to have so many outlets. I think my 10,000 watt generator that I have only has like four 120 volt outlets on it. And on mine, you can't run 120 and 220 at the same time, or 110, 220, whatever you want to call it. You have to run it either or. So you are limited in your outlets that are, feasible and that you can use. So keep that in mind when you're considering this stuff. Now, when it really comes to consistent power, that's where your corded tools really seem to shine. And that's why, even though there are cordless like drywall guns, drywall screw guns that have the limiter so that they are way more consistent with cord as a general rule. And most of the guys that I know still are using the corded drywall guns versus like cordless ones. Every day though, cordless is getting better. Battery technology is getting better. You can find like more powerful and longer lasting. Makita, I think, has some 40 volt. Ryobi has some 40 volt stuff. Some of the Ego, and I want to say maybe even Flex has some 40 volt stuff. DeWalt, of course, is going predominantly 20 volt these days. Not that it's the only thing they sell. And, I think Milwaukee has some 20 volt, is that right? Or is it only 18 volt? But they are getting more and more powerful. We'll talk in another video about whether or not the 20 volt, 40 volt versus 18 volt craze is really all that it's cracked up to be, and why I'm not so worried about jumping on the bandwagon for 20 volt or 40 volt versus 18 volt that I already own, right? So that'll be a conversation for another day. But the reality of it is that there are definitely some tools that benefit from being corded. One that I've noticed and that I am pretty desirous of having, but I haven't bought one because I'm getting by with the tool that I have, is a bandsaw, a portable bandsaw. I have a Makita that's 18 volt, does a really good job. If you match the bandsaw blade to the job you're doing, right, it does a better job. But unfortunately, it doesn't take very long cutting through any kind of like significantly thick or large diameter steel to wear that battery down. And I'm usually using 4 and 6 amp hour batteries. So in that case, like when I'm building tables or doing metal fabrication for a sculpture or whatever, and I'm cutting lots of like thick pieces, it would really be nice to have a corded bandsaw, like a portable bandsaw, because it has a more consistent power, and I'm not like trying to swap out batteries, make sure I have one charging and whatever. And it's one thing when you're just using one tool and you have multiple batteries that can back that tool up as they charge and as you're using it, whatever. Like for instance, with the portable bandsaw, the challenge is that I can run through a battery way faster than one can charge. So yeah, I have a dual charger, a speed charger, but I can still, if I'm cutting through 1/2 inch or 5/8 thick plate of steel, for instance, this is just one example, I can run through that battery very quickly versus versus what the battery charger can charge. That's just how it goes. So in that case, right, running a corded tool would be a better option as far as longevity, fluidity, having things going. Now, Where it becomes even more crucial and even more of a challenge with corded or cordless tools, I should say, is if you have multiple cordless tools on the same platform, which is often the case because we invest a lot of money in our platforms. Like batteries are not cheap, chargers aren't cheap, the tools aren't cheap. So, as a general rule, we might have one or two platforms for most people, even though there are some tool hordes out there who are going to have 5 or 6 platforms. It gets really expensive to invest in multiple platforms, and then you've got to have chargers every time you want to use each of these individual tools of different brands running at the same time, charging batteries at the same time. It can become hectic, it can become confusing, and it can become um, interruptive. It is in a minimal sense if you are not paying attention, right? In a maximum sense, it can become downright frustrating and just lose you a lot of time. So most of us are going to have one or two platforms as a general rule. And even then, if you have like a drill and a planer or a drill and a router or, whatever, and then you also have like, in that case, I was just talking about the bandsaw, and one of them is eating through your batteries faster than the rest, that's actually kind of good because the others aren't keeping up with the need for changing out batteries as quickly, but it can leave you in the lurch when those other tools do go through their battery and now you need one and you don't have one charged for it because it's dead and it's waiting to be put into that heavy use, heavy energy consumption tool. So in my case, what I try to do a lot of times is I try really hard to use the corded tools that consume the most power and that would potentially need the batteries changed the most frequently. And I try to use cordless tools for those that don't need as much energy, that don't consume as many batteries consecutively, so that I can have them around when I need them, right? The other thing that I found is that in rainy situations and things like that, while it's not great ever to really be using your power tools in rainy situations, we know the reality. The reality is that it happens sometimes. So with that being said, we can often find a little bit more security in using like a corded tool that's in a extension cord, especially like a sealed extension cord. They're less prone to let water get into the contacts. They're less prone to have issues because of humidity and things like that. Not that they can't have it, but it's just a reality. That's just how it works. Anytime you have a mechanical contact point for electricity, when you have moisture introduced into it on a regular basis, it can become more of a problem. So that's another place where corded power tools become a better benefit, right, than cordless. And then another one that I can think of right offhand is when we have to buy multiple expensive batteries for one type of product versus having a corded. So I was in the tree climbing and arborist industry for, almost, I guess, a decade or so, maybe just under. And we often use gas powered chainsaws. Well, in the past 5 years or so, chainsaws have definitely been pushing toward battery saws and cordless. And that's awesome in a lot of ways. But I'll tell you what, most chainsaws require a specific battery for them, even if they're a brand that you might already own. Some of them do not. Like DeWalt has a pretty good system where they run their own, I think it's the 20-volt batteries in those for their saws. They're the flex saws, and they can run various kinds of batteries, the high amp, the lower amp, whatever. And they, whatever you bought for your drills and impact drivers and circular saws or whatever will work in your chainsaw. Once again, though, they run through those batteries pretty quickly. I know that like Makita also runs their 18-volt batteries in their chainsaws. And I got to tell you, those chainsaws, DeWalt and Makita, are pretty good. I don't have any complaints about them other than the fact that they actually do kind of run through batteries a little quick. The higher end saws, and Milwaukee also runs their 18 fuel batteries in them, if I remember correctly. And so, I will say Milwaukee seems to have a little bit longer life with their batteries in use than the DeWalt or Makita does, and I would say that DeWalt has longer life than Makita in that grouping of saws. Now, you get into other saws like Ryobi has their cordless saw, and I want to say it's their 40-volt battery. It's a special battery. You have to buy a special charger and a battery. They're not super cheap. And then you have to have yet another charger and another battery. And then the same goes for like the Egos and various others. And if you get into higher end saws like Husqvarna or Steel, same deal. They have specific batteries that go in their saws. And while they work super great and super well, I've tested for Steel the MS220A, and also I have tested for a local shop the four, what is that thing, the 546i or whatever that thing is, for Husqvarna, and they all work really well. Okay. The reality of it though is that it's a lot of cash out of pocket for those tools. And here's the thing, a lot of those companies do actually sell corded chainsaws. Now, where cordless chainsaws, and this is just one kind of power tool, right, becomes a great asset is if you're in a tree service and you're constantly on the move. Where it becomes a real hindrance is making sure you always have a station to charge wherever you're working. So a lot of guys have to like fit their trucks with these high wattage output inverters to be able to do that. Now you're taking up space on the truck and all that kind of stuff. Same thing goes with contractors when you're using cordless only and you're trying to do work, and if your work is mainly outdoors, i.e. landscaping, that kind of stuff, versus interior like carpentry, plumbing, whatever. Now, on the flip side though, if you're more stationary, so like if you're in a furniture building shop or whatever, the chainsaws that run gas become more of an issue because you have fumes and you might be in an enclosed space and that kind of stuff. So corded chainsaws might become an option. And to be fair, corded chainsaws are pretty awesome if you get the right ones. We're not going to talk about brands or styles or models today, but corded chainsaws do have a place. They work really well. You have no emissions to them as far as, like gas fumes and things like that. You don't have to tune them. They're pretty much tuned all the time. And you just need a 120 outlet and you can run the saw. Downside, you have a chainsaw with a power cord, so you have to tug the cord around, hope it doesn't get unplugged. So maybe you're tying cords, and you have to make sure that you don't cut in a way that might cut the power cord, which can and does happen, right? So the benefits there are definitely going to be on the side of, one, the corded power tool is cheaper when it's the chainsaw than the full setup of a cordless chainsaw that can do a decent amount of work. Two, you don't have to worry about emissions or fumes or anything inside, so it's better than the gas chainsaw. And three, you don't have to be cluttering up power outlets and bench space with batteries and chargers and things for your cordless chainsaw, which might be a totally different battery and charger than what your power tools are using. So there are some definite benefits to that. Now, that all being said, they are a little bit different in construction, a little bit different to use, so it might not be the best thing. And that's probably one of the biggest downfalls to corded tools. One, you have to make sure there's an outlet, right? And so that's where cordless tools come into play, and we love them so much. So corded tools, you have to make sure there's an outlet. Two, if you're doing any kind of work that's kind of distant from an outlet, a cord and an extension cord add weight. They can make the way the tool handles, the way you can move it, all that kind of stuff is not as convenient, not as easy. They can be more cumbersome. They can sometimes be heavier, even though as a general rule, my experience is cordless tools, because they have a battery pack, tend to be heavier. So it just depends on the tool that you're using and what it is. And also, like if it's really rainy and muddy, maybe it's not raining, but it was raining, then sometimes a corded is actually worse because now you might be dragging your cord and plug through water. So while they have pros and cons in those kinds of scenarios, it's not all that black and white. So when we consider cordless versus corded tools, we need to be very specific about what it is that we're doing personally, right? Like in my yard for the furniture that I do, I would prefer a corded chainsaw if I'm using a electric chainsaw. Great thing about them is they're pretty quiet, relatively speaking, over my gas chainsaws. Bad thing about the electric saws is that it's hard to find an electric saw that's as big as some of my bigger chainsaws, right? Now, when it comes to building furniture and sculptures like I build, my circular saws are cutting through pretty dense woods a lot of times. So it might be ash, might be locust, might be some white oak, some cherry, some apple, catalpa, might be walnut. If I have any walnut around, I have some exotic woods like jatoba, wangewood, all those kind of things, or wenge, however you want to say it. And what happens with that is cordless circular saws and things don't do bad cutting when the batteries are fresh, but it does tend to wear on those batteries quite quickly when you're cutting through dense woods. As is often the case, I'm going to run a 40 or 60 tooth blade because I'm not going for speed, I'm going for precision, and I'm going for clean cuts in a lot of this furniture wood. So it's going to put a little bit more resistance on that saw, and it's going to cut, and it's going to wear batteries even faster. And then, of course, if you're doing any kind of beveled or mitered cut with a circular saw on a straight edge, it's going to start wearing that battery down pretty quickly. And especially if you're doing long ripping cuts with like a track guide or anything like that, it's going to start wearing those cordless batteries down pretty quickly. My preference as a general rule is a 15 amp corded circular saw. 7 1/4 is what I typically run. There are some 10 inches and 12 inches out there that I don't own. I don't typically do furniture that thick. If I'm going to cut something that thick, it's probably either going to be on the bandsaw or it's going to be with a chainsaw. And then I'll clean it up later with something else. And this really is just a repetition. It's kind of like a recipe, right, for you to think about. So you can go about the same way with angle grinders. Are angle grinders good that are cordless? Yeah, I have a few of them. I have a Makita. I actually have a Bauer that does okay for what it is and what I paid for it. And it's cordless. But I tell you, anytime I throw on like a cutoff wheel for metal cutting, if the metal is over like 1/8 inch thick, if I'm going into 3/16, a quarter, or anything like that, the reality of it is that that cordless angle grinder is going to struggle, and it's going to eat those batteries up pretty quickly. With a corded angle grinder, I can sit there and just go, and the blades wear out. They disintegrate. I put new blades on, and I keep going until the thing gets hot. Now, there are cycle duties on all these tools, and they should only be used to a certain level and only to a certain volume per hour and all this kind of stuff. And most of us ignore that, to be quite frank. But the reality is I have burnt up a ton of angle grinders cutting through thicker steel and just hogging through it that were corded. Why? Because I'm not letting the motors rest. I'm burning out the contacts. I'm doing all this stuff. Because with a corded tool, you can just kind of push through, right? With a cordless tool, it's a little bit harder. The battery dies, and then you got to kind of figure out what you're going to do. You got to either put a new battery in or wait for one to charge or whatever it is. So there are some pros and cons to both for sure. But in certain circumstances, it's definitely, if you need power and consistency, corded tools often are the tool to go for. This is why I don't think that corded tools will ever like fully disappear, because everything I've seen online of all these guys testing these different tools that are 20 volt, 40 volt, whatever, they still don't have the capacity to maintain the longevity of cut or longevity of work under more aggressive circumstances as the corded tools do. I even heard that is it Hilti? Maybe it was Milwaukee. I can't remember. One of those, I'm pretty sure I just read, was putting out a 6-inch angle grinder that's cordless. It's pretty cool. Like where we live in Western Colorado, there's a lot of gas and pipe fitting guys that work for the oil industry, and that would be a super helpful tool to have out in the field that they could use for cleaning up bevels and stuff on pipe that they're welding and whatnot. But I gotta tell you, that thing is going to go through some batteries, and if they want it to last any kind of duration, you're going to have to put some pretty big batteries on it. And now you have quite a bit of weight on that tool. I don't know that it's really that much better, because most of these welders and stuff that I know, at least, they're already running a generator welder on their truck, and they could just plug in a heavy duty extension cord to their generator welder, and they can weld and have the generator running to, power tools all at the same time. Is there a benefit in that case from running a cordless to, running a corded? Yes, there is still. And that would be if you have a crew of 2 or 3, which sometimes happens, and they're all using one generator and you're running out of plugs, or you're running out of wattage power to, weld and do work with, and you need that work done. Now you're eliminating one of the needs for the power from the generator by having cordless tools, right? And they can get the job done. And if it's a 6-inch grinder, they can get bigger work done without it. However, once again, you got to make sure that you've got backup batteries and that you can get the amount of work done needed with that tool within the battery capabilities that you have. And it's not hard to spend thousands of dollars on cordless batteries, right? So when we're talking about this, hopefully you've seen through this conversation that it's balanced. I'm not trying to say cordless are better or worse. There are circumstances that if you plan it right, corded are definitely better, but cordless can be equally good. And there are certain circumstances where cordless are going to be better and corded can be helpful, or there are circumstances where maybe corded and cordless are equally good, and it's just maximizing the potential and the convenience for that circumstance, right? So in furniture building, typically I'm running a few corded tools that need more constant, higher output energy, but I'm also running cordless tools that are better for short bursts of use and consume less battery energy constantly, if that makes sense. So maybe I have the circular saw running because I'm cutting through plywood or dense hardwoods. Maybe I have the chop saw running for the same reason, cutting down to size. The planer is running, it's a corded tool. The jointer is a corded tool. My table saw is a corded tool. But then when I'm going to join all these together, depending on the kind of joinery, maybe it's pocket screws, maybe it's pre-drilled holes and they just need to be screwed together, whatever it might be, depending on what kind of furniture you're building or what kind of sculpture you're building. I might be using like an impact driver, or if I only have to drill like one big hole with a 1-inch or 1.5-inch ship auger, then I can still use my cordless drill, and it can do that without killing it and without me having to replace the batteries every 2 minutes, right? And I can leave the outlets open to the rest of the tools that I need. So comes into play that, those things do happen. They are beneficial in certain circumstances for one kind of tool corded or the other cordless or whatever it is. I also have a generator, so if I absolutely have to, I can pull that out, use it to either charge batteries, or I can use it to run certain tools off of, right? The range of corded tools out there has long, for many, many years surpassed cordless, but that's not the case anymore. Most of the time, there's at least a few options on the market that are cordless that are corded. And I mean, you're seeing this all the way up into tools that are like the big hammer drills, right? Like the Hiltis and the Makitas that are big that run like 12 or 18 inch concrete bits and that kind of stuff. You're seeing like finish nailers that are cordless. You're seeing paint sprayers that are cordless. You're seeing all these tools. Like there's almost no tool that's corded that you can't find the counterpart in cordless. In fact, there are a bunch of options now for battery, cordless routers and cordless planers out there. And planers consume a ton of energy. Now, here's one thing to know about that. In my experience as of today, and I don't have the prestige or whatever to be known by all these tool companies and have the opportunity to test every tool out there. But to this day, the tools that I find the least efficient that are cordless, right, are these higher energy consumption, bigger tools. For instance, more grunt work tools. Planers, like hand planers, I don't find last very long, and they're almost not worth it to me. I'd rather use a corded one because not only do they not last as long, the power keeps varying as you use it. Almost every stroke, it feels like power starting to dwindle from it because they use so much power with each stroke. Same thing goes with like a lunchbox planer, right? Like an 11 or 12 inch. If it's cordless and it's running battery packs, it seems like you can only do so many not many boards depending on what you're doing. Like for me, milling down walnut or oak or whatever, it's pretty hard on those kinds of planers. So if you're doing that kind of stuff for furniture, probably not a great option. Maybe if you're running thin trim that's 2-inch or 4-inch through it, it's better, and you can get way more out of it. But for me, it just seems like I don't like the chop saws or the miter saws, compound miter saws. I don't like jointers. I don't like planers of any sort. Even the like larger routers, trim routers, if you're doing small pockets, yeah, cordless can work fine. The others, not so big of a fan of them so far. We'll have to see if that changes in the near future. And once again, the ones that are out there that seem to have more power, you have to buy a different battery setup because it's a heavier duty battery, more voltage. And then you might run into a situation where you have more power, it lasts longer. But now you've invested a ton more money into the charger and battery, right? So I'm not a big fan of any of those high energy consumption tools for battery use, cordless options for my uses as a sculptor and furniture builder. I do and have had certain kinds of battery chainsaws for tree climbing, and they were okay, but I almost inevitably always went back to gasoline chainsaws. I just find it easier to manage them for my circumstances. Where we live out here, a lot of the houses up until like the 90s, they didn't put any outlets outside at all. Like if I needed an outlet to charge batteries, I would have to call the homeowner or catch them before they left and have them open a door and let me plug into an outlet inside their house. And it was just weird. It didn't really work that well a lot of times. And I didn't like it. So I didn't use cordless as much. And I tried a bunch of inverters and they couldn't sustain the amount of batteries I needed. So I didn't really care for that. And that also went for any of my commercial use blowers. I wasn't a big fan of cordless. Now, I have had some cordless blowers that did okay for like little cleanup around the house. One of the Ryobi ones was fine. I also had a Makita like mid-size blower. It was fine. I have what they call a workshop blower by Ryobi. It's a tiny one. Rigid also has the same blower, but with the slip-in rigid platform battery instead of the Ryobi one with the pin in it. So same thing, just different colors and except the two different battery styles. And of course, rigid is like $10 more expensive than the Ryobi one is. they work okay, like 160 miles per hour on setting 3 or something for wind force. So, those are fine, but like when it gets into like the battery packs for like a backpack blower, I'm not seeing great success with those as far as getting getting them to run long term, right? So, in the end, all of these tools, cordless, corded, they all have their pros and cons and their place and places where I don't think I would personally want to use them, or maybe you shouldn't use them either. And some of those, just as a recap, would be if you need lots of continuous power for long runs at a time, then corded tend to be a better option. If you are afraid of water getting in the contacts and things through like environment, raining, drizzling, whatever, corded often are better because you can seal as a general rule or buy sealed extension cords or whatever and make them safer to a degree. Now, that still has to be, if you're standing in standing water, even a corded tool is not a good option. You probably shouldn't be working there, or you need to make plans of a different sort, right? You don't have to have chargers with you. You don't have to have extra batteries that can get broken or lost if you're using corded tools in that sense. Corded tools are often lighter than cordless tools. Also, corded tools tend to be a little bit smaller in some cases because of the systems that they don't need to function over cordless tools that might have extra components in them to manage the battery to the drive motor and all that kind of stuff. And also, corded tools tend to be considerably cheaper than cordless, especially when you get into higher output tools that are consuming more energy, right? Now, that all being said, corded tools do require a cord, so they can be heavier. You have a cord you have to worry about. People can run over it, trip over it. That it can get cut by other workers or whatever potentially. You have to have a long enough extension cord, and the longer run you need of extension cord, the bigger the extension cord gets. So it is still an extra cost, and it can be more expensive. It adds weight to the saw if you're like up somewhere at any kind of height and having to pick it up and the cord's hanging. So that can be uncomfortable. You do have to worry about if it's sitting in standing water, because now you have an outlet that's being plugged in that's live, and you don't want to electrocute the tool nor yourself. Also, it can be difficult to find outlets in certain circumstances, in certain cases, because maybe there's no outlets available if you're doing contractor work or something like that. And of course, the other aspect of it is that you just have to always, make sure that they're in good working order, because now you've got to worry about the cord and the tool. I mean, cordless, you have to make sure they're in good working order too, but you don't have that one extra piece. Well, I guess you do with the battery. I don't know. It just seems like cords on corded tools tend to get frayed, tattered, torn, broken easier, and it becomes more of an issue potentially if you're not paying attention to it, right? So there's a bit to be, is one really better than the other? Definitely for circumstances, certain particular circumstances, yes. For others, not so much. And it's really up to you and your working style or the ambience you're working in to make that decision. So thanks for checking me out. I know that there's been a few people coming and going throughout the whole thing. I appreciate it. This will be put live or, up for public after the fact. So thank you all for stopping by. Please don't forget to check out my other videos. I have a ton of shorts up about tools on YouTube already. I am doing some more longer format stuff that are not lives so that you can check that out. I did start a members page that's going to have some specific members only content. So if you'd like to support the channel, go by, check that out as well, and become a subscribe. It's $3.99 a month, and you can be a subscriber and support my channel. Also, please don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. And that would be super, super helpful if you would subscribe to the channel, and that way you get notified when I put out more videos. And pretty soon here, I will be doing process videos of building different things. They're going to start off as kind of smaller things that I'm building for specific needs of my house. As you can tell, we're kind of doing a remodel here. It's a light remodel. This is actually staying concrete behind me. We have plans for that. I have artwork that's going in front of it. We did seal the concrete, so that's staying. I will be doing trim work around the edges to block this off. The rest of the room is going to get painted white, and we are doing a mid-century modern themed interior in this house, and I'm doing all the woodwork and everything myself. So hopefully you might find some of that interesting, and you might like some of the furniture I build and some of the other projects as well. So hang around, subscribe, and you can know when I'm doing all that if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Plus, I'll be doing lots more tool reviews and demos. I've got a bunch of tools that I've already reviewed as like first initial thoughts and analysis of them. And then I'll start using them here pretty soon. And we'll talk about how they feel being used, the pros and cons of using them, what I like about them and what I don't. And maybe that'll be interesting to you guys as well. So thanks everybody. Hope you guys have a good evening. Hope you're safe this week. And I will see you next week on Tuesday night at my time. It's going to be 5:30, right? My time, which is Colorado time. And hopefully you guys can join in and see that as well. So thanks, take care, and have a good evening.